What's up? I'm here to talk about Big Tobacco. Now, Big Tobacco is 5 different companies: Philip Morris International, British American Tobacco, Imperial Brands, Japan Tobacco International, and finally China National Tobacco Company. Alright, it's the 1700s, cigars are popping off, and beggars are now going like, what do we do with this? What are we doing with this chewed up little piece of gummy, little gross little bit of a cigar? So they crush it up with little fingers, and they jam it together on paper. They smoke it. And that's cigarettes. About 150 years later, cigarettes are kind of catching on. They're kind of a delicacy. The Allen and Ginter Company held up a prize of what now is $1.8 million to get someone to make the first cigarette rolling machine. And that's what James Bonsack did, which is this guy. That guy. Normally they could only make 5 per minute. This one could make 200 per minute, which was like crazy. Reader's Digest, which was like a huge magazine at the time, publishes an article called Cancer by the Carton, which proved that if you smoke, you can get lung cancer. And that declined sales by 2 years, which was worse than the Great Depression. Because, people couldn't buy stuff. In 1953, the CEOs meet in New York to figure out how to reply to all this stuff going on. 1954 rolls around, Big Tobacco releases an article called A Frank Statement to Cigarette Smokers. They basically just kind of said, we care about your health, don't worry. The Federal Cigarette Labeling and Advertising Act is put in place. It basically just means that you have to put cigarette warnings on packets, but you don't have to put them on cigarette advertisements. 1969, Surgeon General shows that if you're pregnant and you smoke, there are defects in the baby in the form of cleft lips and abnormal bleeding and whatnot. January 1st, 1971, every single advertisement for cigarettes on TV were banned. Cigarette companies had to push their way through and get as many of their advertisements through. This was kind of a big deal because there wasn't really any other way to advertise, through the screen. So, what they did in the 30s and 40s, I know that was before, but they would advertise by showing movie stars smoking their cigarettes on screen. It's a genius way. Of course, everybody wants to buy cigarettes by seeing, Jason Statham smoking Marlboro. Now, most of the money Big Tobacco would give movie studios would then be used to advertise the movies that they created and the movie stars that were in them. A president at Philip Morris even said, exploit new opportunities to get cigarettes on screen and into the hands of smokers. Smoking was a big thing in Hollywood, Now, their main thing was that if you showed someone, doing a certain task and, drinking, people would automatically want that thing. So now, if young kids saw Superman getting thrown into a Marlboro truck, which, by the way, was created for the movie, just hilarious, that kid's now going to associate Superman with Marlboro. Let's play a fun little game. Name a movie above the age rating of PG and tell me if it has smoking in it. I bet it does. 56% of PG-13 movies have smoking in them. Now, 44% of the top grossing films in the US are PG-13. So a large part of what we show on screen has smoking in it. And that's not even including R and NC-17 and, Z46. Surgeon General said, if we change smoking to be liable for an R rating, 1 million lives will be saved doing so. In 1983, DARE is introduced, which we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to 1986, Surgeon General also says, if you are like the child of a heavy smoker and you are surrounded by a lot of smoking, you are also prevalent to lung cancer. In 1989, Surgeon General says that the likelihood to get strokes is higher if you smoke. In 1992, nicotine patches are introduced. In 1993, Vermont bans all of smoking in indoor public spaces. In 1999, the Justice Department claims tobacco to be in a coordinated campaign of deceit and fraud, and they sue them to recover billions of government money to help sickly smokers. In 1999, the government and Big Tobacco argue over if the FDA, the Food and Drug Organization, can have any authority over tobacco. In the year 2000, tobacco farmers sue cigarette makers for $69 billion, claiming that they conspired to undo the federal system that regulates tobacco prices. 2004, Judge Kelser rules that the government can seek a $280 billion claim for disgorgement or forfeiture of illegal profits going toward Big Tobacco. The trial begins. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, that is a long name. They rule that if Big Tobacco is to give up their illegal profits, they must give up more than just their illegal profits. In 2006, Surgeon General says that the debate is over. Smoking of any kind is bad, in any form, at any time, in any way. Also in 2006, Judge Kelser, which we just talked about, finds that Big Tobacco has been lying and manipulating American health issues and marketing to teens and children for 50 years. 11 to 12 years later, Big Tobacco comes out saying that it's true, that they did do that. Major parts of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act are implemented, which just means that low-income smokers are now able to get the help they need. 2016, FDA has full authority over all tobacco products. You name it. Name one right now. Go ahead. No, I'm being serious. Now, in 2009, Obama gave FDA authority over tobacco products, but that didn't mean that they could ban cigarettes and vapes and whatnot altogether. It just meant that they could ban flavorings of those certain things. Jeffrey Wiggin worked on reducing cigarettes and the harm that they had, and found out that Big Tobacco was impact boosting, which meant that they were tampering with the ingredients in, tobacco and cigarettes. Jeffrey Wiggin started working at Brown and Williamson, one of the branches of Big Tobacco. He started working in January of 1989. Now, they hired Wiggin because he had a 20-year background in healthcare and biotechnology. B&W knew that nicotine was addictive and caused cancer since the 60s, but they used legal strategies to make sure that the public didn't know about that. Now, Wiggin went to a meeting where people talked about creating a safer cigarette. You see, the B&W lawyers didn't like the idea of a safer cigarette. That means that their cigarette is the safest out of all cigarettes, which means that the other cigarettes are more harmful than this one. So, those other cigarette companies can sue B&W for that. So what they did was they had Kendrick Wells, a staff attorney, go through every single discussion of the transcript and delete every single part that talked about a safer cigarette, which Kendrick Wells claimed that he didn't do. Wiggin complained to the president of B&W. The president told him to mind his business and to shut down the idea of a safer cigarette completely. So that's what Wiggin did. He started looking into the ingredients in a cigarette and he found glycerol. Now, normally glycerol is safe. It's used to moisten cigarettes, but when the chemical is burned, it turns into a different chemical called acrolein, which can irritate the lungs. Wiggin also found a compound named coumarin, which is used to create a sweet taste in the cigarettes, but it can also cause tumors in mice. So the worst part was that coumarin was found to be a carcinogen, which, if you know what a carcinogen is, it's something that causes cancer. So when Wiggin talked to B&W about this, they said that they removed it. But looking back on some documents, it found out that one of their brands still used the compound. Wiggin, frustrated once again, wrote a memo to the president of B&W and said, "Hey, I'm not going to work with that thing because it kills people." B&W responded by saying that they wouldn't remove coumarin until they found a substitute. In March of 1993, Wiggin was fired for poor communication and poor performance. Lowell Bergman, a producer on the CBS News show 60 Minutes, urged Wiggin to get interviewed by him. Wiggin claimed that he and his family were stalked and threatened by what they thought was B&W not to talk on the 60 Minutes show. Long after this claim, the FBI searched his home and found out that he probably wrote those threats himself. On February 4th, 1996, Wiggin went onto the show 60 Minutes after feeling guilty for not coming out and saying the manipulation of the tobacco company. CBS couldn't show the original interview because they worried B&W would sue them for tortious interference. What they did instead was show an edited version of the interview that cut out most of the major details. After this aired, B&W launched a smear campaign on Wiggin and also sued him for theft, fraud, and also breach of contract. Wiggin's depositions were leaked onto the Wall Street Journal, which helped clear his lawsuit. CBS was then able to air the unedited version of the 60 Minutes interview. Wiggin was part of a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit as a testifier against Big Tobacco. And this was the biggest lawsuit against Big Tobacco ever. Big Tobacco is told to give over $368 billion over the course of 25 years to states in the U.S., and this was the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement. After all of this, B&W removed Coumarin, finally. In 1930, the first ever documented patent for an e-cigarette is given to Joseph Robinson. It isn't known if there was ever made a prototype or if it was ever manufactured. In 1965, Herbert A. Gilbert creates the first device that looks more like something that we see today as like an e-cigarette or a vape. He wasn't able to commercialize it very well, and it failed. In 1979, Phil Ray and Norman Jacobson reached major retailers to commercialize their, as they called it, vape. It didn't use electronics, but it used the vapors from nicotine, and that's why it was called a vape, and it caught on. The device failed for being faulty, and it didn't work out from there. In the 1990s, Eclipse creates the first heat not burn device that just heats up the tobacco rather than burning it. In 2003, a pharmacist, Hanluk, I definitely butchered that name. He creates the first e-cigarette after his heavy smoker father. The company the man worked for, Golden Dragon Holdings, developed it and sold it, and it was commercially great. It was great. But they also changed the name to Ruyan, meaning like smoke. The WHO, the World Health Organization, I think, considers e-cigarettes not safe and people shouldn't use them. A study by Golden Dragon Holdings says that e-cigarettes are safe and a better alternative from smoking tobacco. In 2009, many countries are banning e-cigarettes from being imported into the country, mainly just because, they're not good, and also they're an unauthorized drug delivery device. Some of the countries even had fines if you sold them. So like in Hong Kong, it was 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. Or today with inflation, that is $18,000. So in 2009, Smoking Everywhere and Enjoy, which were two e-cigarette companies, file a lawsuit to the FDA saying that they have no authority over e-cigarettes. FDA tests Enjoy and Smoking Everywhere's cartridges for e-cigarettes. They find trace amounts of tobacco nitrosamines and finds that in one of the cartridges, there's a non-toxic amount, about 1%, of diethylene glycol, the chemical commonly found in antifreeze, brake fluids, cosmetics, and lubricants. A fatal dose of the chemical is about 1 milliliter, and it was really only 2/100ths of a lethal dose. The FDA never disclosed that it wasn't a fatal dose, they just said that it was bad. 2014, a doctor studies over 9,000 e-cigarettes and claims that the contaminants in the e-cigarettes can't pose a health risk. In 2020, the FDA says that they would do very little to restrict e-cigarettes and its flavors, going against what President Trump said in 2019, which was that they wanted to remove all flavors in e-cigarettes in the US. In 2020, the White House bans all e-cigarette flavors excluding menthol and tobacco-flavored products. You can't buy e-cigarettes and its flavors from big retailers. You can buy them from a shop across the street or something. Like, I googled it, I have 17 shops in an 8-mile radius of my home. So the first campaign is DARE. DARE stands for Drug Abuse Resistance Education. The way they did it was they had local police come to people's schools and go, hey, don't do drugs, or don't smoke, or don't do alcohol. Their big catchphrase was, just say no. The slogan turned into a game, which was endorsed by Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan because, it looked good if they were like, don't do drugs. Studies in the 1990s showed that there was little to no impact on teen drug use and alcohol use and smoking use. Drug use actually got worse among teens because they wanted to do drugs out of spite of the DARE program. But smoking did decrease until vaping was a thing. And, that got worse. In the late 2000s, they created a new curriculum called Keeping It Real. It wasn't just a blatant anti-drug program. It taught kids about self-control and habits and emotional awareness and communication with adults. Overall, those are great things to teach kids, and their lives can be changed for the better because of that. Our next campaign is the Truth Initiative, or Truth.org, or Truth Orange, or they got a lot of names. This was mainly targeted towards teens and usually taught them about anti-vaping and, all those stuff in between. They put a lot of their videos out onto the TikTok account Truth Orange. A while ago, they had videos of people dancing and saying, don't vape, and every single person in the comments said, I'm going to hit my vape because of this video. But more recently, they're showing more factual type of tips to quit smoking. Around 7 years ago, they had this one ad with a ton of outdated jokes from the top text, bottom text, era of the internet. They had the Aaron's Animals cat, the crazy ex-girlfriend, the Ermagerd girl, and a unicorn vomiting, all saying it's a trap, which is not great. Now, some more recent ads that I've seen on TikTok and YouTube is they would bring in influencers to promote what they called a depression stick, which was basically a vape. Every single TikTok influencer would be like, oh man, I can't advertise this, this is sick. Overall, Truth isn't horrible. They've gotten 450,000 teens off smoking, and saved billions of dollars in healthcare. Our next campaign is The Real Cost. Now, these are mainly shown on TV. Most of their stuff are about vapes having metals in them. One time they had a ad of a metal monster and they're like, we got a VFX team to make this video so you could quit smoking. Alright, cool, thanks. More recently on TikTok, I've seen these videos of a girl who's obviously a contortionist, just kind of bending her body and acting possessed, and she acts normal when she smokes a vape. This is our highest one. For some reason, this campaign prevented up to 587,000 kids from the age of 11 to 19 and saved $53 billion in healthcare, which, good job. Our next campaign is the Tips from Former Smokers made by the CDC. Now, I grew up with these quite a bit, and, dude, they're scary. Most of them included Terry H. showing how she gets ready in the morning, or what happens if you do smoke.
Then your hand redefined, and now you're ready for the night.
At 53, she died after being diagnosed with terminal cancer. The CDC filmed her 2 days before her death to be shown on TV as part of the Tips from Former Smokers campaign. Terry had filmed 4 PSAs. Overall, they saved $7.3 billion in healthcare and prevented 129,000 deaths.